All right, I've got a picture that I want to show you on the screen, and this is you can look at this picture and get a pretty good idea how long ago that was. That's on the fellow on the left of the shirt. You probably think that's Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it's actually me. And that little fella in the front of the canoe, that's my son who's now in college. And the picture was taken 20 years ago in Alabama on the Little River. That was the name of it, the Little River. You know how they named it the Little River? It was little. It was little. It wasn't big. The big river in our area was the Old Alabama. That was big enough for big boats. And guess what? Guess where the Little River flowed into? Y'all are smarter than you look. It flowed right into the Alabama River. Well, I had gone swimming in the Little River ever since I was a kid. And when I was in my mid-20s or whatever, I bought a canoe, my very first canoe. And I've been on canoe trips before. Probably you have too. But the ones I've been on in the past were the kind that you pay the money to go, and they put you on a bus, and they load up the canoes, and you float from one station to another. And somebody has gone through there with chainsaws. They do it once a year, and they cut all the logs out of the way. They cut away all the brush so that you can have a smooth, easy journey. Well, I had gone to this particular bridge swimming my whole life, and I knew that as the crow flies, at least, it was about 10 miles from this bridge on the Little River to the Old Alabama. It emptied out on the Alabama River at a place called Dixie Landing. And the thing is, I'd never heard of anybody making that float before. I'd never heard of anybody canoeing from that bridge to Dixie Landing. And I just figured, I guess everybody else is just so dumb they haven't even had the idea. But let me tell you, when you find out that nobody else does something, there's usually a reason why they haven't done it. Now, I'm going to tell you about this trip I took, and I'm not telling you, by now you got to know I don't tell you stories just for the heck of it. I partly do, but mainly there's a parable here. There's a parable about life here in this canoe trip that I took. Because as you can see in that picture, I'm smiling. This is my first ever solo voyage. I'm boldly going where no man has gone before that I know of. And the water was flowing fast that day. The sun was shining. It was May. Birds were chirping. My little boy, Jake, did not go with me, but he got his picture made as if he was going to go with me. Thank the Lord he didn't go with me. I'd have come back alone most likely, because here's what happened. What happened to me on that little canoe voyage is what happens to almost all of us, maybe all of us, in life. When a baby's born, it's generally a pretty joyous occasion. And nobody, very few people, I'll say, have a baby, hold that baby for the first time and think, ooh, he's in for a miserable life. No, he looks so full of hope and wonder, and that little girl is so innocent, so pretty, so sweet. She's untainted by the evil in the world, by the hardships in the world. And in early childhood, you might say it's almost like all of us start out in Eden. In Eden, where all our needs are taken care of, no major problems, Kids even run around naked and don't seem to know it or care. But eventually, all of us have to leave the garden. And once you leave the garden, there's no going back. In the Bible story, there's an angel with a flaming sword that guarded the way. You can't go back. You can only go forward. Get that? You can only go forward. Because as you've heard me say before, the Bible starts in a garden with trees and a river. And guess what? At the very end, it ends in a garden with trees and a river. But once you leave Eden, there's no going back. You got to go forward. And that's why you got to learn to persevere and pray and paddle hard. Well, let me tell you what happened when I left that beautiful shore. I paddled on down the creek for, the first 300 or 400 yards, and it was great. I was making great time. I'll probably be there within a couple of hours at the most. But here's when the strangest thing started happening. The most awful thing. The most confusing thing. Complicated thing. You ever heard the old Statler Brothers song? Things get complicated when you pass 18. Well, things got complicated once I passed that bridge and I got into unfamiliar territory. There had been hurricanes in the area, a series of them over the last 50 years. And I got back in there and found out why nobody else ever canoed that. There were these giant cypress trees down over the river. And what the worst part of all is that the river didn't remain a river. It started splitting out into these little streams of water. At first, it split into two. And I was, okay, well, which one is going to take me to the old Alabama? And which one's going to take me to somebody's fish pond? And so what I did is I stopped and I prayed and I watched very carefully. And what I went by is I watched for which one seems to have the strongest current. That's what I'm going to go with. And so I went with the one with the strongest current until it split in half. Again, two different directions. And once again, I stopped, I prayed, and I paddled on the one with the strongest current. And another 100 yards, it happened again. And another 100 yards, it happened again. And before long, the river that started out being as wide from here to this stage as that wall was about that wide. The channel I was going on, there was no more paddling. And yet it was deep. There were logs everywhere. There was Spanish moss. There were cottonmouth moccasins all over the place, hissing at me in my imagination. I just knew they were there. And here's the thing. I couldn't stay in the safety of my boat because it wouldn't float. It wouldn't go. I had to act. I started out, I was going to drag it. I was going to walk and drag it, but I was barefooted. And there were these sharp stumps sticking up, cypress stumps, you know how they stick up sharp? That ain't going to work. So I had to swim, float on my belly. So I was floating along on my belly through this dark black water with moccasins hissing at me. One was wrapped around each foot. Well, it should have been. It felt like it. I floating along, dragging this canoe, coming to log after log, hauling that thing over. Had a watermelon with me that got away and floated away. Never saw it again. That was the worst part of the whole trip. But you know what I did that day? As the river split and split and split and split again and again and again, and the channels got narrower and narrower. I started wondering this. Have you ever wondered are you really on the right path? Now, you can look back to some period in life that was sort of like the period pictured on the screen. When you first started life, or when you first started following God. It looked pretty simple, and it was simple at that time. But things get complicated when you pass 18. Sometimes when you pass 12, they get complicated. And streams go everywhere, and it's not at all uncommon. In fact, that's an understatement. Let me say it this way. It's very common for people to arrive at midlife and find themselves in a dark wood, wondering where the path went. This stream I'm on now, does it really go anywhere? Am I going to be lost? This was way before cell phones. There would have been no service there anyway. How many days am I going to spend out here? Do you know what it's like when you're not sure you took a wrong turn? You're not sure that you're on the wrong stream because you certainly didn't do it on purpose. I mean, who wakes up in the morning thinking, okay, what can I do to absolutely ruin my life today? You don't have to do that. It's way easier. All you got to do is just keep moving through life. And a whole lot of people by midlife are where I was, halfway down Little River, and wonder, does this really lead anywhere? Is this going to dry up completely? And I found that there was only one thing for me to do. I should say this way, there was one thing I wanted to do, and then there was another thing that I actually could do. What I wanted to do was go right back where I'd come from. Problem is, I'd already come too far. The current was too strong. And besides, my vehicle was waiting down at Dixie Landing where Mena left it. If I went back to where I came from, there was nobody there to pick me up. And so I just kept going. Sometimes in life, when you don't know where you're headed, you just got to keep going. Who was it? I want to say it was Yogi Berra who said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. I kept taking them, and I kept feeling for where the current seemed to be moving. And the analogy there is that when you feel you may have taken a wrong turn, or things are just getting confusing. How did I get in such a confusing conglomeration of streams of water and difficult to navigate territory? Stop, pause, get quiet. Pray. Be still. And listen for the sound of the water. Hear the water. And discern which way the current is flowing. Because that's your channel. Regardless of how narrow it may be. Jesus did give us a little preview. Narrow is the way that leads to life. Few there be that find it. One reason few find that narrow way is that once it starts getting confusing, they just turn around and go back up the broad way they came from. Well, what happened was I kept following the middle path. And I pulled and dragged and I walked and I cut my feet and I scraped my belly trying to skim over sharp sticks and logs and all this, and got snake bit 5 or 6 times in the neck, but lived. Believe most of what I say, but not everything, okay? All right. But here's what started happening. After I paddled and paddled and paddled, and drug and drug and drug, and floated and floated, and swam and waded, I started noticing something. I saw a little stream of water coming back into this stream. And all of a sudden the water was a little deeper and a little wider. And that gave me some hope. And I kept going. Another 100 yards, here come another stream of water. Back into the channel I was in. I was in the right place after all. And by the time the third stream of water, which had branched out, came back in, guess what? The water was now deep enough for me to get back in the canoe and paddle once again. And a paddle, and a paddle, and every few 100 yards, another of those streams that had diverted off came back in. And eventually, I was actually in a larger stream of water, moving faster and easier than when I first started. But what if I'd given up while I was confused, when it was difficult? And I paddled and I prayed. I paddled and I prayed. By the way, I tried two different things, neither of which worked. First, I just tried paddling. Whenever I saw that the stream was getting narrower and the water was going off in another direction, I just paddled harder. You know, that's what most of us naturally do. When we get scared, when things aren't going right, just paddle harder. You realize you're on the wrong road, you took a wrong turn, and you're headed the wrong direction. What do most people do? What some people do, especially men, just drive faster. And that means you get to the wrong place even quicker. I wanted to paddle, but I couldn't. Paddling alone wasn't helping me. You know what else wasn't helping me by itself? Praying. Because I saw this confusing ordeal. I said, beam me up, Lord. Lord, bring all this water together. Now. Not next Tuesday. Now. Do you know he didn't do it? I don't know what he was thinking. But here's what I discovered. The choice is not merely paddling harder or praying harder. It's both and. It's paddling as hard as you can, dragging when necessary, and praying with everything you got. That's actually very biblical. The scripture says that we are co-laborers with Christ. We're in this partnership with God. And you've heard me say before, some of you, what my high school Sunday school teacher taught me. Said, boys and girls, God will never do anything for you that you can do for yourself. But she also said, there are some things you can't do for yourself. And so here's how this works. It's simple. Those things that you can do for yourself, paddle, navigate, not give up, drag, wiggle on your belly if you have to. God's not going to do that for you. But at the same time, there are so many things outside of your control that you don't know. You don't know where these streams are going. You don't know if you're taking the right path or not, but God knows. So pray, and listen for the trickle of the water and the current, and stay in the main stream. Because here's what God knew in that moment, and I guess I knew it, but I was questioning it. You ever heard the old saying, all rivers run to the sea? I think that's pretty well true. They run to the sea. And it's also largely true that all streams run into creeks. And creeks run into little rivers. And little rivers run into big rivers, which run into the sea. And the point is, if you keep paddling and you keep praying, you will get to your destination, the one you set out for. And if you know at all what we're talking about, you're going to really relate to a lady I want to tell you about. Her story is told in the book of Exodus, chapters 1 and 2. She was a Hebrew slave in Egypt. And she and her husband had a couple of children already. And about the time they found out they were expecting a third baby, bad news came. The river that they were just floating merrily down the stream with suddenly got scary and ugly. Exodus chapter 1. I want to read you some verses. Exodus chapter 1, 9 and 10, and then verse 22, and then chapter 2. The Bible says, eventually a king, a Pharaoh, came to power who did not know Joseph. That means he did not understand who these Hebrews were, where they'd come from. He had no respect for them. He had no love for them. In fact, they were a threat to him. And so here's what that Pharaoh said. Verse 9. He said to his people, look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape the country. So basically, they're going to join our enemies. They're going to whip up on us. Then they're going to leave. And we've lost our labor force. So he came up with a couple of different ideas, but this is what he finally settled on, verse 22. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live. Throw the boy into the river. See how we keep coming back to rivers. Rivers, in the Hebrew mindset, water, depths, in the Hebrew mindset, were not beautiful, adventurous places like they are to us. When the Hebrew people heard about rivers, they didn't think about Little River. They didn't think about the Ouachita River. They didn't think about the Buffalo River or the Arkansas. You know what they remembered? The Nile River. Every Hebrew baby that is born, throw him into the Nile. And if you could have been in Egypt in those days, and you took your stroll by the river, you were going to see dead babies floating on one of the largest rivers in the world, gently down the stream, sadly, tragically down the stream. And chapter 2. Verse 1 through 4. About this time, a man and a woman from the tribe of Levi got married. That's the priestly tribe, by the way. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a special baby. Mothers, when you first tell your baby, was he special? Was she special? This little baby was special, and she didn't want him to become crocodile food. And so she hid him for 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket made of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. She put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. The baby's sister then stood at a distance, watching to see what would happen. I want to point out a couple of things about just those 4 verses. First of all, this woman did everything in her power to protect her child. She kept him hid for 3 months. But by the time he was 3 months, she could hide him no longer. Think about why. He was getting stronger. His lungs were getting more developed. His cries were louder. And it was just a matter of time before some Egyptian soldier walked past, heard the baby crying, grabbed him by the legs. I'm saying she paddled for as long as she could. She did everything she knew to do for as long as she could do it. But the time came when that didn't work anymore. In your life, in my life, there are some ways of operating, some strategies that we developed earlier in life just to survive or just to make it. Attitudes we developed, defense systems we developed, armor we learned to put on just to survive. And it worked for us back then. But there eventually comes a time when what used to work for you no longer works. And what do you do then? You're going to do one of 2 things. You can continue trying to do what you always did because it used to work in a different situation at an earlier time, different place. But life is like a river. It's constantly changing. And what works in one season of life, what brings you life and prosperity and healthy relationships and what makes you successful in your profession at one season of life, and it's totally appropriate for them, just like it was appropriate for her to hide that baby as long as she could. But what the thing, the strategy, the way of working that worked for you at an earlier stage eventually stops working. And if you continue trying to make it work, there's going to be a death, a tragic death. Somehow, on some level, this Hebrew slave woman understood that I can no longer keep doing what I've been doing. I got to try something different. And so she made this little basket of reeds taken from the edge of the Nile, and she put tar and pitch within to make it waterproof. And she took that baby, and she looked at that baby for what was going to be the last time she ever saw him. And she looked into his eyes, those dark brown eyes, and there was something about those eyes that seemed to look straight through her. And she held him, and her hand was on his back. And his little back was so soft. And she thought, this is one Hebrew boy whose back has never yet been cracked by an Egyptian whip. This is a child who doesn't know anything about cruelty yet. And so she prayed, trusting God with things that were out of her control. But she also paddled And by that I mean she prayerfully discerned, okay, what things are in my control? Or at least, now I'm not sure control is a good word. We don't have near as much control over anything as we think we do, but we have influence. What can I do to influence the outcome? See, praying and the paddling, the praying and the acting. She's trusting God to do what He can do, but she's also doing what she can do. Here's what she did. Here's what she knew. Just so happened that the daughter of Pharaoh was barren and had been since she was a teenager. And this was a tragic thing for an Egyptian princess who can't produce heirs. And all the Hebrews knew about this princess who could not have children. And every day, this princess came down to the Nile with her servants to bathe. And the Hebrew slave woman called her little daughter, little 6-year-old Miriam. Miriam in Hebrew, in Greek, it's Mary, by the way. Miriam, come here. I got a job for you. This is something only you can do. I want you to go. I'm going to place the little basket in the water where Pharaoh's daughter will be coming. And I want you to hide over in the bushes and be ready for whatever God may open up. For whatever happens. And you know what happened, I think. But just in case you don't, let's read it. Exodus 2, 5 through 10. Soon Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the riverbank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. The little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. And that's something God did. Wherever you encounter love, you can know that God is close by. Even if it's coming from somebody you would not expect to be loving or godly. The little boy was crying. She felt sorry for him, and she said, "This must be one of the Hebrew children." All right, then, that's when little Miriam really started paddling hard, because a stream opened up, and she knew she better paddle through it now. There's a time to wait upon the Lord, and there is a time to act. And a wise Christian learns to tell the difference. Don't you wait when it's time to act. And don't make the mistake of acting when you should be waiting. It takes some careful discernment. The baby sister approached the princess and said, "Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse this baby for you?" she asked. When you think about it, Pharaoh's daughter never had a baby. She can't nurse. "Yes, do," the princess replied. So the girl went and called who? Of all people, the baby's mother. And so the daughter of Pharaoh had a conversation with this Hebrew woman who only days before was lost in the big woods with streams going everywhere, not knowing what to do. And the daughter of Pharaoh said, "Take this baby and nurse him for me. I will pay you for your help." Now, come on now. Not only did the Hebrew slave woman get to keep her baby, she got paid for it. Because somebody was both praying and paddling. Somebody was counting on God to do what only God could do. And they were also ripe and ready and aggressive, ready to do what they could do. And she named him Moses, which means I drew him out of the water. Now, sometimes when you hear a lesson or a message about things you need to act on, things you need to grasp, embrace, you can easily get the idea that this is just really all about you. That the preacher, all he's trying to do is just help. Oh, I'm just trying to help Tom here. I'm just trying to help Kurt. Well, this is a message for each of you as an individual. Because when you find yourself confused in a dark wood and the screams seem to be going everywhere and you feel like giving up and you can't turn back, yes, what happens in your life does matter. All by itself. If nobody else was involved, it matters because you matter. But guess what else? When you win, the people around you win too. When you lose, other people lose. When you quit, you let other people down that you may not even know yet. But when you persevere and you keep praying and you keep paddling until it begins to finally open up, other people besides you get blessed and get free. Let me show you very simply what I mean. This Hebrew woman who both paddled and prayed, she saved a baby. She saved Moses. And that right there, that would have been a wonderful story if that was the end of the story. But remember what we just said. When you pray and paddle, you'll help yourself, but you're going to help other people. Moses, this little boy that almost wound up dead and would have, without her praying and paddling as hard as she did, this Moses eventually set his whole nation free from slavery. She saved one who saved millions. But that's not even the end. Those millions of Hebrews became a mighty nation. And they raised up David, who wrote the Psalms, and Elijah, the prophet, and Isaiah, and Daniel, and Jeremiah. And ultimately, who else came through the line of these Hebrews? Jesus Christ. And because of Jesus Christ, we, who are not Hebrews, are blessed and saved here and now, thousands of years later. And you know where it started? With one powerless woman who paddled as far as she could, then prayed as hard as she could, and trusted God with the outcome. What does the scripture say? Brothers and sisters, don't grow weary in doing good, for in due season you will reap if you faint not. Would you stand with me for our time of decision, prayer, reflection, listening, and may you sense very clearly where the current is actually flowing in your life. That's the living water. That is the path to follow. Press ahead, for you will reach your destination.